Hello and welcome back, listeners, to another very interesting episode of the Cosmic Confluence podcast. I'm your host, Sana, and today we're talking about something really interesting plasma, the fourth phase of water, and we'll talk about our bodies and the macro micro connection. Now, listeners, this is the podcast where consciousness meets science, spirit meets matter, and curiosity meets expansion. And let me introduce my guest to all of you listeners. Well, she's truly a cosmic herbalist. She is an encyclopedia of Earth's wisdom and star-studded insight. She's a certified aromatherapist, astrologer, anthroposophist, biodynamic farmer, and founder of Aetherbal, which is a revolutionary topical care brand mimicking the body's plasma through silicon plasma hydrate. Well, in this episode, we'll explore the mysterious fourth phase of water, which is plasma, and how this element mirrors both the microstate of our bodies and the vast macrocosm of the universe. We'll dive into the ancient wisdom, modern biochemistry, and why our skin, the electric absorbing organ, the largest organ of our body, is the perfect gateway to healing. So, if you have ever felt the pull between the stars and your cell, this episode will speak right to your soul. So, with that, listeners, let's welcome Bonnie D'Arcangelo. Bonnie, welcome to the show. And as always, it is such an honor to have you with us.
Thank you so much. It's glad to have another conversation with you.
Yeah, definitely. So, Bonnie, I mean, we had studied this. I remember I had studied this a bit about plasma in my school days, but recently I haven't come across any of articles or resources or anything around this. So let's start with the basics. What exactly is the fourth phase of water, and how does plasma differ from the traditional solid, liquid, or gas states we are taught in school?
We have to kind of think of like different types of plasma. So when the plasma we're talking about today is like the plasma of fluids. Most people, of course, are familiar with three phases of water: solid, liquid, and gaseous. But there's a fourth phase of water, which is a gel-like substance. And this gel is highly ionized, meaning
Okay.
it's similar to like alkaline water, which is very ionized, and it is able to conduct electromagnetic energy across it. And the fluids in our body, we're aware that we're 60 to 65% water, but that water isn't in a liquid state in our bodies. Otherwise, we might start seeing it seeping out of all of our pores. About 80 to 85% of that water in our body is held in the state of plasma or a structured water. And so it is a gel like substance. And this is really important to understand for how our body communicates between all of our cells. So if you think about in your mind, try and imagine how you think that our body's cells are communicating with each other. It leads you down to some questions. Many people think, oh, well, the nervous system communicates to the muscles, but that's actually not really how it works. The body is communicating through electromagnetic impulses that are carried across these plasma fluids in our body. And that is how all the billions of cells that are within our body are communicating with each other. And this is similar if we look at the universal structure of the known physical universe. Space is not empty, it is 95.5% plasma. Some people even say up to 99% plasma. And
Okay.
this is really important too because in space, it is conducting electromagnetic energy. And we don't have a lot of time to get really deep into the science. So, listeners who are interested in this can continue to research some of these topics more in depth. But there's a large connection between these plasma fluids out in space and solar flares and the Earth's magnetic poles. And there's research being done as to This being how the sun essentially communicates, to use a very kind of earthly language, with the earth on an energetic setting. And we, as the microcosm of the macrocosm, our bodies mimic that. And we tend to think of ourselves as this physical being that's all held together in one entity, but we're actually billions of little living organisms within ourselves. And each one of our cells has a consciousness of their own. We may think of ourselves as this being with a consciousness, but within our being is a consciousness. And it's the same as the universe. And so when they say in a lot of esoteric like literature that man is the microcosm of the macrocosm, it's because we are an exact model of that, where you have this large universe with all these planets and stars and living beings and organisms within that structure. We're the same. We're the universe. And within us are planets and stars and living organisms of many different varieties. And we communicate, albeit unconsciously, within the human being, because we are not conscious of this communication state that's taking place within us, but we communicate across these plasma lines. And this is the part that I find extremely fascinating and is why all of my research surrounds this plasma fluids of the body, is because it leads to some interesting topics in helping to heal and repair the human body, and not just on the physical level, but also being able to kind of tap into that spiritual aspect of the body that's more energetic and requires an energetic healing. So, working with a silicon plasma allows a way to help heal and repair those electromagnetic connections, which plays into our consciousness of our body and how it communicates. So, one of the most fascinating parts of my research that I have come across and really love is the topic of people who have had amputations. When somebody has an amputation, for instance, let's say that their leg below the knee has been amputated for one reason or another, the body and the mind still recognizes that the limb is there. And the people suffer from what's called phantom pains, in which they'll have an itch on their foot that they can't scratch. But the mind is saying, no, my foot itches. However, there's no foot to itch, and it's sort of maddening to these people because there's nothing they can do about it. And allopathic medicine has no drug that can take away this pain from these people who are struggling with this. And that's just one aspect, because there's a lot of nerve damage and other things that are happening. And so the beauty of some of our research is using this silicon plasma hydrate as a carrier for medicinal herbs. We're able to help restructure those electrical magnetic signals of the body and shut them off, and within just a few minutes, people find relief from these phantom pains. And this was a really like a breakthrough light bulb moment in my work of saying, like, this is evidence to these electromagnetic connections that are there. And I'm very into a lot of um, kind of esoteric spiritual studies, and in some of these teachings, particularly by the work of Rudolf Steiner and the Anthroposophical Society, which is some of my favorite works to read because very fascinating his research that he did. He talks about how the human body is more than just a physical body. And we often know this as the body, spirit, mind, soul kind of relation between the human beings. But another phrase for this kind of spiritual body of the human being is the etheric body or your energy body, often called your prana. So there's many different names for the etheric body of the being in many different cultures. And almost all different spiritual sects throughout different cultures recognize that there is an energy body outside of the physical body. And so in my language, we would call it the etheric body. And so, what happens when somebody has had an amputation, we've removed the physical body, but we cannot remove the etheric body. So, if you could see somebody's energy body, you would see the full being with the leg that had been removed. And there becomes this disconnect between the physical and the spiritual part of that human being. And so these plasmas that are part of the universal structure and makeup are very, very important in bridging the connection between that spiritual physical person and that energy body of the person. And I we called our company Etherbal, which the root word comes from the word eon, and it's spelled Aeon, and it means far off into the distant future. And we named the company Etherbal because our vision of it is a medicine that is for the future of the human being as we start to recognize the need to integrate these spiritual teachings that have been around for thousands of years, but have not been integrated into this modern concept of science and the physical being. But even science is starting to prove the existence of these energy bodies. And so, if we are going to look at a natural holistic medicine for the future, we have to take into consideration how we not just heal the physical body, but we heal that etheric or energy body simultaneously.
What an explanation. What an explanation, Bonnie. I mean, this shifts so many perspectives out there. Especially, I was blown away when you mentioned about how the solar flares and sun, they are communicating with Earth in a kind of earthly language through this electromagnetic fields. I mean, that is so and ethereal, interesting, and how, if energetically we look at our bodies, even if some part is lost, there's a leg or a hand or something, the energetically the body still looks as a whole being there. So this is really, really interesting, Bonnie. Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah, there's so much to that concept too that you mentioned about the sun communicating to the earth and the earth
Mhm.
communicating to the sun. And I come from a very religious family, and
Okay.
I am constantly trying to impart an understanding on
Mhm.
my parents who are Christians that
Mhm.
that and there's this fear that has been instilled in them about the planets and astrology, and that it is somehow demonized in the Christian religion. And I recently was sitting down with my father, and we were talking about Easter Sunday that's coming up, and he mentioned something about how it changes dates, and I said, "Well, that's because it's based upon the lunar cycles." And he had this look on his face like, "How could my religion be based upon the lunar cycles?" And I said, "Well, it is. It's based upon the first full moon that occurs after the spring equinox." And so he had to check me on Google because he couldn't believe that that was possible. But the point of this is that God created this whole universe, especially if you take it from this perspective of God creating the universe in the Christian religion. So, how could, astrology in a sense be evil? Now, we could say that, oh, trying to read the future and predict things and whatnot, but the demonization of the moon and its relation to the human being or the different planets and their relation to the human being, I find hard to digest in the concept of that it was, created by the creator. And so we have to understand that the universe wasn't made as these, unconscious rocks floating through space. No, if we are truly a reflection of the macrocosm in the microcosm in us, then you have to assume or understand that those planets are living conscious beings, even if they don't look like us. And I talk about this a lot to people, even right down to the physical elements on our planet. We don't
Mhm.
think of, for instance, a plant or a rock as a conscious being because we can't see and understand the plane of existence in which their consciousness is on. But
Mm.
if you really start to research some of the important facts of things that are being looked at with plants, you start to realize they're actually conscious beings. Because if they were not, how could science have proven that if you say nice things to a plant, it will grow better and be healthier than a plant that you say evil things to? Or if you play positive music to a plant, it will, again, thrive more than a plant that listens to really negative music. If that plant is not conscious, then it could not be influenced by the sounds that it hears, or that when it is caressed and touched, that it will grow stronger on the one branch where it is being constantly touched and caressed than it will on the rest of the plant, and it will actually gravitate to grow more towards that one branch that is being touched constantly, because there is a consciousness. It is just different than what we recognize as our own personal type of consciousness. And it is the same with the rest of the world and universe around us. They have a different type of consciousness, but that does not mean that they are not conscious. And when we can learn to approach the world from this perspective, that everything around us is conscious, we can start to have a deeper relationship in which we will start to fall more in rhythm with the world and the universe around us. We won't feel so disconnected and alienated. And in part of a lot of the anxiety and the depression that takes place in our modern world is that disconnect from nature and from the world around us, because we have separated ourselves and told ourselves that we are superior and we are the only conscious beings and we are this and we are that. And by separating ourselves, we cut ourselves off from the nurturing that the environment around us has to offer. And I think that's one of the most important things people could take away from our conversation here is, yeah, the plasma is a very fascinating concept, but the most important thing is understanding that we are a conscious being living in a conscious universe, and we can have an interpersonal relationship with that conscious universe.
Definitely, definitely. I absolutely agree with you on this. Wow. Okay, okay. And um, since we talked about the parallels between the plasma and space and the happenings inside our internal landscapes, talking about the way you blend science and spirit here. I mean, there is herbalism, biodynamic farming, astrology, anthroposophy. How do you reconcile ancient plant wisdom with this leading edge understanding of bioplasma, Bonnie?
Well, I'll relate it back to the same as the human being, and we have all these little conscious cells within us. So within each plant, there are what science has identified as plant constituents. And these are essentially chemical compounds that a plant has produced for its own personal needs. And when we start to look at those chemical compounds that science has identified, it allows us a pathway to understand the consciousness of the plant, because those are the signature markers for what it is experiencing. So if a plant is experiencing severe drought, so let's take one species of plant, same plant, and plant number one is in a very harsh and dry environment, and plant number two is in a very luxurious environment. It has good soil, it has plenty of sunlight and water. The plant that is in the harsher conditions will produce more of these plant constituents than the plant that is in this kind of lush environment. And that is because those are for plants' survival. And so these are those kind of scientific markers for us for the consciousness of the plant and what it is experiencing. Well, we as human beings have words that we can use to express what is taking place on our inner landscape. The plant is using these chemical compounds as its form of communication to what is taking place on its inner landscape. And we only have a few more minutes, so there's a lot of places you can go with a deepening of the understanding. But as you start to look at plants and plant families and groups of species, and you start to see that they have kind of similar constituents across them, you can start to relate them to different ethnic groups and different countries and the sort of cultures that people form within their groups and their families. And it's just a different way of looking at expression. So we express ourselves with our clothes, with our food, and with different ways of speaking and talking and acting. And it's the same with these plant families where they have these interrelated species. They share similar chemical compounds. And it's through these chemical compounds that plants communicate to each other within their own species and within other species. And so it just takes a little shifting of one's mindset. And again, it starts with recognizing they're conscious. So if this is a conscious being, let me understand how it is communicating. And the example of plants is through those plant constituents. And so science shows us what's there. And then we have to look within ourselves to find an understanding.
True, true. And before we wrap up, Bonnie, let's also address the skepticism around this.
Mhm.
You know, some skeptics they might argue that, uh, yeah, plasma as a healing force sounds beautiful, but aren't we over spiritualizing science? I mean, how can we keep this grounded, Bonnie, and practical?
Yeah, so there's a lot of scientific studies on the work of silicon, which we is in the form of orthosilicic acid. So that's its kind of molecule name. So there's lots of scientific studies as to the similar things that we've been talking about. It's used widely in the medical field for numerous health benefits. So we're not without scientific evidence. So yeah, we're talking about spiritualizing something, but I'm not sure that I like that idea, that word of spiritualizing something. I prefer that we're recognizing that
Hey, great.
we are energy bodies. We're like a battery, it has a store of energy. If we're not, then tell me how you keep yourself warm.
Yes, yes,
How
definitely.
do you keep your blood warm? Different than, the reptiles. We don't go out and lay on a rock and absorb heat from our environment.
Mhm.
Within our own selves, we are generating warmth. And they've done studies on yogis who are living in the mountains in the ice cold, who are able to generate heat through their own body through meditation and breath work. And that is because they've been able to kind of connect to that inner energetic aspect of the human being. So I think what we're really talking about is bridging the gap between what are called spiritual concepts and science. And that's where the future is heading. And even science itself is starting to recognize that in order to really move forward, they have to address certain things that science doesn't want to admit to. And so my belief is that in the future, we are going to start to see science admitting to some of these so-called spiritual concepts as realities.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Great, great, Bonnie. So, before we wrap up, if our listeners would like to uh, reach out to you and explore more about Aetherbal, what's the best way to do that?
So you can visit my herbal products company, which is aetherbal.com, or you can visit my website, bonniediarcangelo.com, where you can see a list of other services that I provide.
Okay, I'll have all the videos mentioned in the show notes. And thank you so, so much, Bonnie, for reminding us that healing isn't linear. It's definitely a current, a flow, a frequency, and sometimes, you know, there are extraordinary evidences out there. And the most profound medicine is what our ancestors already knew, that nature's intelligence is both at a microscopic as well as at a macrocosmic level as well. So thank you so much once again.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
So, listeners, if today's episode lit something up in you, don't forget to rate, share, and drop a review. And also, don't forget to check out Aetherbals. You can refer to the show notes along with this episode. And until next time, stay curious and stay cosmic. Thank you.